A million people once lived in a city surrounded by endless desert. Medieval Baghdad was an island in a sea of sand, and it could not feed itself. Its survival depended on a forgotten system of overland caravans, a hidden network moving goods across impossible terrain. By the end of this story, you will understand a masterclass in human resilience that built empires where nothing should have grown. How did caravans deliver ice to a desert caliph? And what kept a line of camels safe for months in a trackless waste? The answers redefine our understanding of ancient mega-cities. What does it truly take to sustain a civilization when the land itself refuses to cooperate? The desert offered a brutal arithmetic of survival. Beneath a sun that bleached the sky, yielded almost nothing. Sand stretched to the horizon in waves of shimmering heat, broken only by rock and dry riverbeds. For a farming family, a single bad season meant hardship. For a city of 500,000, local agriculture was not just insufficient, it was a geometric impossibility. There simply was not enough water, not enough fertile soil within a reasonable distance to plant the wheat, rice, and vegetables needed for a single day. This created a profound and constant vulnerability. Cities like Cairo, Samarkand, and Isfahan were not just in the desert, they were islands within it. Dense, thriving centers of commerce, learning, and power that floated on a barren sea. Their walls held back the sand, but they could not hold back hunger. Every loaf of bread, every sack of grain, every piece of fruit represented a victory over geography, a triumph of logistics over nature. The lifeblood of these urban islands was not water from a local well, but a continuous, invisible river of goods flowing from distant, greener lands. This created a desperate, unyielding demand. A city does not pause its consumption. Its markets must be filled, its granaries stocked day after day, year after year. The question was not if they needed outside help, but how on earth they could possibly get it. Who could bridge that vast, empty distance between fertile field and hungry city? The answer would be found not in a grand invention, but in the patient, plodding footsteps of the most unlikely heroes. The caravan was a fortress on the move. It was not a simple line of beasts, but a self-contained world, a micro-society that carried its own laws, economy, and social order across the void. At its heart was a strict hierarchy. At the top sat the silent partners, the wealthy merchants who financed the venture from the comfort of their city offices, risking capital but not their lives. Their proxy on the sands was the caravan master, the Karwan Bashi. This individual was not just a leader but a CEO of the desert, a figure of immense authority and responsibility. He negotiated with local rulers, set the punishing pace, maintained discipline, and bore the ultimate weight if the journey failed. His word was law, for in the emptiness, survival depended on absolute unity. Beneath him moved the lifeblood of the operation. Guards, often hired from nomadic tribes familiar with the land, provided a wary perimeter against both animal and human threats. Camel drivers, masters of animal husbandry, understood each beast's temperament and limits, their chants and clicks a language of its own. Cooks prepared communal meals from precious stores, their fires a tiny beacon of civilization at dusk. And then there were the specialists like the Dalal, the broker scout. This agile figure would ride ahead on a fast mount, reaching the next oasis or town days before the main caravan. His job was to secure lodging, negotiate preliminary prices, and gather intelligence, turning the chaotic arrival of hundreds of men and animals into a smooth, pre-arranged transaction. This traveling town even had its own culture. Around evening fires, stories were traded as valuable as spices. Disputes were settled by the Karwan Bashi's swift justice, for internal conflict could doom everyone. There was music, gossip, and the shared fatigue that forges a unique bond. This social engine, this deliberate creation of order, was the true innovation. It transformed a collection of individuals and camels into a single, resilient organism, capable of enduring isolation, monotony, and peril for months on end. But to power this mobile society across hundreds of miles without roads or resupply, they needed a biological miracle, a living machine perfectly engineered by evolution for this one terrible, beautiful task. The true engine of this mobile fortress was a biological masterpiece. The Dromedary camel was not merely a beast of burden, it was a living machine, a technology honed by millions of years of evolution specifically for the task of crossing absolute desolation. Every part of its physiology served the caravan. Its legendary hump is not a water tank, but a dense deposit of fat, a concentrated energy reserve that could be metabolized for both sustenance and, crucially, metabolic water. This allowed the camel to travel for weeks without fresh grazing, converting its own stores into fuel. Its kidneys are hyper-efficient, extracting every possible drop of moisture from its waste, producing urine thicker than syrup. Even its nostrils are designed to reclaim moisture from its own exhaled breath before it escapes into the dry air. Perhaps its most astonishing feat is its ability to tolerate radical dehydration. Where a horse losing just 15% of its body water would collapse and face grave health risks, a camel can lose over a quarter of its weight from dehydration and walk calmly on. This is due to unique, oval-shaped blood cells that keep flowing even as the blood itself thickens, preventing the circulatory collapse that would strike another animal. And when it finally reaches a water source, it performs a final miracle, gulping down over 100 liters in just 10 minutes, rehydrating at a speed that would lethally burst the blood cells of any other creature. This combination of endurance and rapid recovery was the non-negotiable foundation of the caravan. A horse or ox required constant water and fodder, tethering any journey to a tight chain of green patches. The camel carried its own supplies and liberated the route. It could march for 25 days between oases, carrying 400 pounds of silk, spices, or grain on its back, fueled by little more than thorny desert shrubs. This biological engineering turned the vast, empty spaces between cities from an impassable barrier into a challenging but navigable highway. But a ship, no matter how sturdy, is useless without a chart. Where did these living ships sail in a sea of sand that offered no landmarks, no paved roads, and no signposts? The answer lies in a map written not on parchment, but in memory, stars, and the very texture of the earth beneath their feet. The map for this journey was written in the stars and whispered on the wind. While we speak of the Silk Road as a single entity, it was never a paved highway with clear signs. It was a shifting, breathing network of possibilities, a web of choices etched into the desert floor by countless caravan tracks. Specific arteries became lifelines for specific cities, forged not by emperors but by necessity and profit. One of the most formidable was the Darb el Arbain, the 40 Days Road, a brutal corridor of sand and stones stretching from the Darfur region in Sudan all the way to the gates of Cairo. For 40 agonizing days, caravans sometimes numbering thousands of camels moved north, carrying gold, ivory, and ostrich feathers. This route also saw the movement of individuals, a difficult chapter where people were part of the harsh economic calculus of the era, transported under severe conditions to markets in Egypt. It was a road built on immense human cost, directly feeding the insatiable appetite of a mega-city with wealth and labor from 1,000 miles away. Far to the west, another desert pulse beat between the dunes. The Trans-Saharan routes connected the legendary city of Timbuktu, a hub of scholarship and trade in the Mali Empire, to the Mediterranean coast of North Africa. Here, the economy moved on a paradox. caravans would depart from the salt mines of places like Taghaza, carrying massive slabs of a mineral that was worth its weight in gold in the salt-poor south. They would travel for months to trading centers like Timbuktu, where they would exchange salt for the gold mined from the forests and rivers of West Africa. The northbound camels would then carry that gold back across the void. This was a silent, staggering transfer of value, where the most sought-after commodity in one region was utterly commonplace in another, and the desert was the only broker capable of connecting them. Navigating these tracks was a high art, a form of literacy taught over generations. There were no permanent roads. Guides read the landscape like a book. They memorized the shapes of mountain ranges on the horizon, knew how the wind carved specific patterns into the crests of certain dunes, and followed the faint trails of ancient, hardened camel dung that marked the safest passage. At night, they steered by the constellations, their path a celestial dialogue between earth and sky. This knowledge was a guarded treasure, passed from father to son, the intellectual property that made the physical journey possible. These routes were the data highways of the medieval world. A caravan arriving in Baghdad did not just bring silks and spices, it brought news. It carried letters from distant rulers, reports on crop yields in Persia, gossip about political shifts in Central Asia, and stories of new inventions from China. The cargo bundles held more than goods. They carried the very information that allowed these isolated cities to function as part of a connected, globalized system. So what exactly was inside those bundles? What was precious enough to justify such an epic, perilous journey? The bundles lashed to those patient camels held the very fabric of civilization itself. While silk and spices capture our imagination, the true lifeblood of the caravan was far more mundane and far more essential. The majority of cargo space was dedicated to sheer survival. Enormous sacks of grain, often wheat or rice, formed the rolling foundation of every major caravan heading toward a desert city. Dried fruits like dates, figs, and apricots provided vital calories and nutrients that would not spoil. Salt, that humble mineral, was a biological necessity and a preservative traded in heavy blocks. Without this constant, bulky influx of calories, the mega-city would starve within weeks. But the caravans also carried dreams and status. Alongside the grain, you would find delicate porcelain from China, raw ivory from Africa destined to be carved into intricate chess pieces, and lustrous pearls from the Persian Gulf sewn into royal garments. There were bolts of fine linen, wool, and the legendary brocades of Byzantium, turning the wealthy of Baghdad and Cairo into walking displays of global connection. The caravans also supplied the very bones of urban industry: ingots of copper and tin for metalworkers, rare dyes like indigo and saffron for artisans, timber for construction in regions where trees were scarce, and even paper, that revolutionary medium for administration and scholarship, traveled these sandy routes. Perhaps the most astonishing cargo of all was a testament to pure luxury and logistical genius. From the snowy peaks of the Lebanon mountains, special insulated caravans would transport compacted snow and ice, packed deep in straw and sawdust. Over hundreds of miles and under the desert sun, this precious melting treasure would journey to the courts of caliphs in Baghdad, where it was used to chill sherbets and cool the drinks of the elite. This was not just a frivolous treat, it was a powerful symbol. It proclaimed that the city's reach was so long, its logistical network so masterful, that it could command the very climate, delivering winter to a summer palace. Every item, from a sack of wheat to a block of ice, tells a story of intense, specific demand. It reveals a desert metropolis as a colossal engine of consumption, drawing in the ordinary and the extraordinary from the farthest corners of the known world to sustain its glory. Yet, moving such immense wealth across lawless spaces was an open invitation for trouble. This river of gold and grain needed protection. giving rise to one of history's most enduring and misunderstood institutions. The wealth of empires moved on the backs of camels, but it was built on lines of credit. Financing a desert caravan was not for the faint of heart. It represented one of the riskiest investments in the medieval world. A single sandstorm, a bandit raid, or an outbreak of illness among the animals could wipe out an entire fortune in an afternoon, leaving financiers with nothing but debt and dust. To transform this existential gamble into a viable engine of commerce, merchants invented sophisticated financial instruments that would feel remarkably familiar today. The most widespread was the commander, a brilliant partnership that powered trade from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. Here is how it worked. A wealthy, sedentary investor, often based in a safe city like Baghdad or Cairo, would provide the entire capital for a venture. They would supply the money to purchase goods, hire guards and drivers, and provision the caravan. In return, a traveling merchant who brought no money but contributed his expertise, his labor, and most importantly, his willingness to face the perilous journey, would manage the expedition. If the caravan succeeded, profits were split according to a pre-negotiated ratio, often 70% to the silent investor and 30% to the traveling partner. If it failed, the investor bore the total financial loss, while the merchant lost his time and effort. This system was revolutionary. It spread risk away from any single individual, allowing capital to flow from those who had it but could not travel to those who could travel but lacked funds. It created a powerful incentive for success and bound the fates of the city and the desert road together in a contract. But moving shiploads of silver across continents was impractical and dangerous. So they invented a way to move value without moving metal. Banking houses in major trade hubs began issuing letters of credit, known in the Islamic world as a subterranean. A merchant could deposit a sum of money with a banker in, say, Damascus. The banker would provide him with a coded, sealed letter. The merchant could then travel safely to Cordoba or Samarkand, present the letter to a corresponding banker there, and receive his funds in local currency. This not only secured wealth from highwaymen, it stabilized currencies and created a trusted, international financial network that transcended political borders. From this ecosystem of shared risk, the earliest concepts of insurance naturally emerged. Groups of merchants would form mutual agreements to collectively bear the loss if one member's cargo was lost or stolen, distributing the blow so that no single trader was utterly destroyed. This financial architecture was the invisible scaffold upon which the physical caravan was built. It turned trade from a desperate gamble into a calculated engine of economic growth, fueling the markets that fed the mega-cities. Yet, all the financial ingenuity in the world could not stop a blade in the darkness. A contract could not deflect an arrow. For the caravan to deliver its priceless cargo, it first had to survive the journey through the most lawless landscapes on Earth. The contract could not deflect an arrow. For all its financial ingenuity, the caravan's most immediate threat was not market fluctuation, but a blade in the darkness. Moving through the vast, ungoverned spaces between cities was an open invitation. The same emptiness that offered a path also provided perfect ambush sites for raiders who knew the land intimately. In the Arabian deserts, Bedouin tribes watched the trade routes like hawks. In the deep Sahara, the formidable Tuareg, the legendary blue men of the desert, commanded the dunes. To them, a laden caravan was not just a target, it was a natural resource, a mobile treasury sent by fate across their ancestral lands. This created a perpetual, simmering tension that defined desert politics. Security, therefore, was not an afterthought. It was a core operational cost, baked into the price of every bolt of silk and sack of grain. The first and most visible line of defense was the caravan guard. These were not simple hired muscle, but professional fighters, often drawn from nomadic tribes themselves. They were masters of desert warfare, armed with composite bows for long-range strikes and curved swords for close combat. Their pay was good, for their role was existential. They rode ahead as scouts, scanning the horizon for unnatural stillness or the telltale shimmer of distant movement. At night, they maintained a vigilant watch, knowing the hours before dawn were the most dangerous. Legends grew around the most famous of these protectors, men whose names alone were said to deter raids for 100 miles. But no guard, no matter how skilled, could hold off a determined force attacking from all sides. This led to the caravan's second strategy: sheer mass. There was profound safety in numbers. A train of 50 camels was a tempting target. A procession of 500, flanked by a small army of guards, was a formidable fortress on the move. Bandits were businessmen of risk, and attacking such a force promised a costly, uncertain fight. This calculus of risk gave rise to the caravan's most sophisticated tool, not a weapon but a negotiation. It was called the Kufara, a payment for safe passage. Rather than fight every tribe whose territory they crossed, caravan masters would often negotiate a pre-arranged toll with local chieftains. In exchange for silver, cloth, or weapons, the tribe would guarantee the caravan's safety through their lands, even providing guides and escorts. This transformed a potential predator into a temporary partner. It was a delicate, often tense diplomacy, a recognition that the desert was not empty but a mosaic of sovereignties. A wise Karwan Bashi knew when to fight and when to pay, his ledger balancing the cost of guards against the price of peace. Yet this system was fragile. When negotiations broke down, or when a desperate or ambitious raiding party saw an opportunity, the results could be catastrophic. Historical records speak of caravans vanishing entirely, swallowed by the sands after an attack. A single successful large-scale raid could mean the loss of a city's entire grain reserve for a month, causing immediate famine and economic shockwaves that toppled merchants and spiked prices. These events were more than crimes. They were geopolitical incidents that could trigger wars or reshape alliances between cities and desert powers. The constant shadow of banditry meant the caravan was always a diplomatic mission as much as a commercial one, its journey a slow-moving negotiation between the settled world's wealth and the nomadic world's power. To navigate this landscape of both physical and political danger, the caravan masters relied on a form of knowledge far more precious than any map, a living compass passed down through generations. Their map was not drawn on parchment but written in the night sky and whispered by the shifting sands. In a world without magnetic compasses or satellite signals, the caravan guide possessed a form of literacy more valuable than gold, a science of observation passed from master to apprentice over generations. This knowledge was the caravan's true compass, a closely guarded intellectual property that could mean the difference between life and a slow, thirsty end in the dunes. At the heart of this system was celestial navigation. By day, the sun's arc provided a rough east-west guide, but true precision came with the darkness. The North Star, Polaris, was their unwavering anchor. Because it sits almost directly above Earth's northern axis, it remains fixed in the sky while all other stars appear to rotate around it. A skilled guide could measure the star's angle above the horizon to gauge latitude, knowing that as they traveled south, Polaris would sink lower, and as they went north, it would climb. Constellations served as both clock and calendar. The position of Ursa Major, the Great Bear, told the hour of the night. The seasonal rise and set of stars like Scorpius or Orion marked the time of year, dictating when certain mountain passes would be clear or when seasonal rains might briefly flood a dry riverbed, creating a fleeting opportunity for water. But the stars were only part of the story. The desert itself spoke a subtle language to those who knew how to listen. The direction of wind-sculpted dunes, known as barchans, always pointed their crescent horns downwind, revealing the prevailing breeze that had shaped them. a crucial clue for orientation during a blinding sandstorm. The types of sparse vegetation offered silent testimony. A cluster of tamarisk trees might hint at a deep, subterranean water table, while certain hardy grasses could indicate a seasonal seep. Even the behavior of birds was read as a sign. The flight path of a desert lark at dusk might lead toward a hidden spring, its routine as reliable as any road sign. This profound environmental literacy transformed a seemingly trackless waste into a textured, readable landscape. Every rock formation, every pattern in the sand, every shift in the color of the earth became a waypoint. The guide did not simply travel through the desert, he conversed with it, his route a dialogue written in footprints and remembered landmarks. This deep, ancestral knowledge was the GPS of the medieval world, turning an ocean of emptiness into a navigable highway. Yet, even the most skilled navigator and the hardiest camel needed sanctuary. After weeks of relentless travel under a punishing sun, their destination was not the glittering city on the horizon, but a specific, critical node that made the entire system possible, the Caravanserai. After weeks in the whispering emptiness, the Caravanserai rose from the desert like a fortress of salvation. These were not simple rest stops but monumental waystations of stone and mud brick, strategically spaced a single day's journey apart, roughly 20 to 30 miles, the absolute limit for a heavily laden camel train. Their design was a masterclass in functional security. Imposing, windowless outer walls deflected both sandstorms and unwelcome glances. A single, massive gate, often reinforced with iron, could be barred shut from within, turning the complex into a defensible keep for the night. Passing through that gate was like entering another world. You stepped into a vast central courtyard, a dusty arena of controlled chaos where hundreds of groaning camels were finally relieved of their burdens. Along the perimeter, shaded arcades led to stables for the animals, secure storerooms for the goods, and simple chambers for the travelers on an upper floor, overlooking the hive of activity below. This architectural blueprint was repeated across continents, from the deserts of Persia to the steppes of Central Asia, a universal solution to a universal need for safety and respite. But to see the Caravanserai as merely a medieval motel is to miss its true, revolutionary purpose. Within those high walls, something extraordinary happened nightly. The gate closed, sealing in a microcosm of the known world. A silk merchant from Samarkand might share a fire with a spice trader from Malabar. A Coptic Christian scribe from Egypt could discuss astrology with a Buddhist monk from Dunhuang. The courtyard became a bustling, polyglot forum where deals were struck in a mixture of Arabic, Persian, Turkic, and Chinese, facilitated by hand gestures and the universal language of ledger books. Here, goods were not just traded, but ideas were cross-pollinated. A Persian poetic form might inspire a song sung later on the road to Aleppo. A medical technique observed from an Indian traveler could be carefully noted by an Andalusian physician. The latest innovations in mathematics, astronomy, and engineering were disseminated not in royal courts first, but on the straw mats of these desert inns. This was the caravan's most profound and enduring legacy. It carried more than silk and salt. It carried the very seeds of culture, science, and belief, planting them at every fortified oasis along the way. The Caravanserai was the internet hub of its age, where data packets of human knowledge were downloaded, mixed, and uploaded again to travel further. Yet for all this vibrant exchange, the system had a silent, fragile dependency. The entire network, from financier to camel driver, relied on a force far greater than any empire, a delicate ecological balance that was quietly beginning to shift. The true price of a desert city's splendor was paid in footsteps and loneliness. For every merchant who grew wealthy in Baghdad's covered bazaars, there were hundreds of nameless men whose entire world was the back of a camel and the next shimmering horizon. These were the caravan's essential cogs, the drivers, guards, and laborers whose endurance made the miracle possible, and whose lives were a testament to silent, monumental sacrifice. The camel driver or cameleer spent his life walking. While merchants and masters might ride, his place was on the ground, guiding his train of 6, 8, sometimes 10 animals with clicks and gentle tugs on a lead rope. He walked the entire distance, every single mile, from Damascus to Medina, from Sijilmasa to Timbuktu. Over a career, he could circle the globe several times over on foot, his sandals wearing thin on stones baked by the sun and frozen by the night. His expertise was intimate. He knew each camel's personality, which one was stubborn, which was gentle, which had a weak hoof. He spent his evenings checking for sores under the heavy packs, applying salves, and murmuring to settle the restless beasts. His reward was a small wage and a share of the basic rations, his life a cycle of dust, animal sweat, and relentless forward motion. The guard's life was one of unbroken tension. His eyes constantly scanned the tawny landscape, searching for the telltale glint of metal or the unnatural stillness that betrayed an ambush. Sleep was taken in short, wary shifts, his hand never far from his weapon. The threat was not always a dramatic raid. Thirst-crazed animals, sudden sickness in the ranks, or a snapped axle on a supply cart could be just as deadly. He faced the desert's raw violence directly, the sandstorms that arrived as a roaring brown wall, blotting out the sun and threatening to bury men and animals where they huddled. There was no shelter but to turn your back to the wind, wrap your head in cloth, and pray the caravan stayed linked by rope until the world re-emerged hours later. The temperature could swing from a blistering, skin-cracking heat by day to a bone-deep cold after sunset, a physiological assault that wore down even the hardiest individuals. Then there was the mind's silent struggle, the psychological weight of the void. Travelers wrote of the crushing monotony, where one day blurred into the next, marked only by the slow passage of identical dunes or the same stark mountain range on the horizon. The silence, broken only by the groan of saddle leather and the soft plod of countless feet, could play tricks on a man's mind. Poets and chroniclers who traveled these routes left behind laments not for bandits, but for this soul-deep isolation. One medieval traveler wrote of the desert as a place that turns the heart to stone, where a man's only companions were his own lengthening shadow and the vast, indifferent sky. Illness was a constant, quiet specter, digestive troubles from unfamiliar water, fevers that swept through the close quarters of a night's camp, injuries that festered under the harsh conditions. Any of these could mean being left at the next Caravanserai with a few coins, hoping to recover enough to join another train heading home, or facing a lonely passing far from family and community. This was the human machinery of the caravan. The system that sustained glorious cities of philosophy and art was built on the backs of men who likely never entered a library or a palace garden. They fueled the metropolis with their labor, while their own world remained one of scorpions under sleeping mats, of meals cooked over fires of dried camel dung, of water rationed by the mouthful. Their legacy is not in stone inscriptions, but in the very existence of the cities they supplied. Every loaf of bread in Baghdad, every scroll in Cordoba, every gold coin in Cairo was made possible by this relentless, anonymous procession through the sand. Their endurance answered the desert's most fundamental challenge, not with a single brilliant invention, but with the slow, cumulative power of countless ordinary journeys. The city gates of Baghdad did not just mark a boundary, they were a valve. As dawn broke over the Tigris, the massive wooden doors would groan open, and the desert's bounty would begin its final journey into the heart of the metropolis. The first and most critical stop was the customs house, the Diwan al-Kharaj. Here, the caravan master presented meticulously kept ledgers, listing every bale, sack, and crate. Government clerks, sharp-eyed and efficient, assessed the value of the goods on behalf of the caliph's treasury. Taxes were not an afterthought, they were the fuel for the city itself. paying for the soldiers on these very walls, the judges in the courts, and the engineers maintaining the intricate canals. This moment of fiscal transfer was where the desert's wealth officially entered the city's bloodstream, its value quantified and recorded with a dip of a pen. Once cleared, the caravan dissolved into the city's specialized veins. Camels laden with foodstuffs were guided toward the vast, sprawling grain markets, the Suq al-Hubab. A single sack of golden wheat, perhaps milled in Sicily and carried for months across the Mediterranean and Syrian desert, was finally offloaded. It was purchased by a wholesale merchant who supplied the city's network of public bakeries. By that afternoon, that Sicilian wheat, now ground into flour, mixed with water from the Tigris and baked in a communal clay oven, would emerge as a stack of flat, warm bread. It would be sold for a few small coins to a laborer heading home, his family's hunger staved off by a journey that began on another continent. Meanwhile, other camels turned toward the covered market arcades known as Caesarias, the domain of luxury and craftsmanship. A heavy bale of fine, cream-colored linen from the Nile Delta was carried into a tailor's suq. A master tailor, after haggling with the textile merchant, would unfurl the fabric with a practiced snap. Using shears sharp enough to slice silk, he would cut precise patterns, transforming that Egyptian flax into a lightweight kameez for a wealthy merchant or an undergarment for a court official. The caravan's goods dictated fashion, comfort, and social status. In the spice market, the air thick with 100 aromas, a carved block of pink Himalayan rock salt, having crossed mountains and deserts, was carefully scraped with a special tool. Its delicate flakes were portioned into a small brass dish, purchased by a servant from a noble's household. That evening, those very flakes would season a lamb stew served at a lavish banquet in a riverside palace, a subtle mineral taste on the tongue that was a direct whisper from distant, snowy peaks. This was the urban metabolism in action. The caravan was the city's relentless external heart, pumping lifeblood in the form of grain, cloth, spice, and metal into every district and social stratum. From the pauper's bread to the prince's salt, every layer of society was woven together by the same invisible threads of trade. The system created a profound interdependence. The tailor relied on the Egyptian farmer, the baker on the Sicilian miller, the noble on the Himalayan miner, and all of them relied on the camel driver who had walked every scorching mile between. Baghdad did not simply consume goods, it metabolized them, transforming raw materials from the ends of the earth into the substance of daily life, culture, and power. This daily miracle of logistics required not just camels and courage, but a hidden framework of rules and trust that operated across thousands of miles and between people who would never meet. The most precious cargo was weightless. While the camels strained under sacks of grain and bales of cloth, their most transformative load was carried in the minds of the travelers and in the sealed scroll cases tucked among the goods. The caravan was, first and foremost, a supremely efficient information network, the high-speed internet of the medieval world. It moved news faster than any single rider could dare. It transmitted ideas that would outlast empires, and it wove a tapestry of shared knowledge across deserts and mountains. The physical journey of goods was merely the vehicle for a far more profound exchange. When a caravan master paid the Kufara to a desert chieftain, he was not just buying safety for his silks, he was securing passage for a letter from a sultan, a medical treatise for a library, or a secret treaty between distant powers. These caravans were the trusted couriers of state, their very mundanity making them perfect for diplomacy. A lone royal messenger on a fast horse was a conspicuous target, but a scroll hidden in a merchant's strongbox within a train of 500 camels was invisible. News of a change in ruler, a border skirmish, or a royal marriage would travel along these trade routes months before any official embassy could be arranged, allowing merchants and rulers to adjust their strategies in real time. This constant flow of intelligence stabilized trade and, by extension, the political order that depended on it. But the caravans carried more than affairs of state. They carried the very engine of human progress. Think of the scholar Ibn Battuta, whose famous 30-year journey from Morocco to China and back was not a solitary trek. He moved from Caravanserai to Caravanserai, joining merchant trains for safety and companionship. His entire travelogue, a window onto the 14th century world, was a product of this infrastructure. He did not brave bandit country alone. He bought a seat, so to speak, on the regular service. Within the walls of those desert way stations, he met judges, mystics, and astronomers, absorbing and sharing knowledge that he would later carry 1,000 miles further. This was the caravan's classroom. A Persian physician traveling to Cairo might share a new surgical technique with an Egyptian colleague over a campfire. A translated copy of the works of the Greek philosopher Aristotle, painstakingly rendered into Arabic in Baghdad, could be carried by a book merchant to a library in Cordoba, where it would be studied by scholars who would then build upon those ideas. Mathematical concepts like the numeral system we call Arabic but which originated in India did not magically spread. They hitched a ride. The concept of zero, that revolutionary idea, moved west from Indian mathematicians along the same dusty tracks that carried spices and jewels, carried by traders and scholars who understood its power. This cross-pollination of thought was the true catalyst for the Islamic Golden Age, that extraordinary period of scientific and cultural flourishing. The Great House of Wisdom in Baghdad was not an isolated think tank. It was a central hub in a planetary network. Its translators and scholars depended on the caravan to bring them manuscripts from Byzantium, Persia, and India. The astronomical tables compiled there, the medical encyclopedias written, the philosophical debates held, all were fueled by this relentless physical transfer of data on parchment and in memory. The caravan was thus a mobile, decentralized university. Its curriculum was written in the stars its navigators used, in the geometry its architects employed to build caravanserais, and in the complex financial instruments its merchants invented. Every journey was a seminar, every merchant a potential teacher, every bundle a possible library. This system did not just sustain cities with food, it nourished civilizations with ideas, connecting minds across a fragmented world and proving that the most durable things built in the desert were not made of stone but of thought. Yet, for all its resilience, this magnificent system rested on a foundation that was silently, slowly beginning to crumble. The desert's true currency was not gold, but a few precious drops of clear liquid. Every logistical triumph, every financial innovation, every step of the camel driver's journey ultimately hinged on a single, brutal equation: water in versus water out. In an environment where a human could perish in 3 days without it, the caravan's entire existence was a meticulously calculated dance around this scarcest of resources. The route was not plotted between cities but between water sources. A known well or a reliable oasis was not just a stop, it was a non-negotiable node in the network, a fixed point around which all travel plans orbited. These were places with names whispered with reverence, like Al-Jawf or Tama in Arabia, lifelines in a landscape of thirst. Scouts riding days ahead of the main column had one primary mission: to confirm the water was still there, still drinkable, and not controlled by a hostile force. The arrival at a well was a moment of profound, disciplined relief. A strict order of operations took over. Guards secured the perimeter first, for a water source was the most vulnerable point on the journey. Then animals were watered in a controlled rotation. Each camel allowed its miraculous, gulping drink but prevented from trampling the precious source. Finally, humans took their share, filling leather skins and clay jars. The entire stop was orchestrated with military precision, for lingering too long risked exhausting the well for the next caravan, a deadly act of poor desert citizenship. But what happened when the known wells were too far apart, or when a city's thirst outstripped the local springs? Here, desert societies performed one of history's greatest feats of quiet engineering, the Qanat. This was not a simple well, but a subterranean river hand-dug by generations of laborers. The process began in the foothills of distant mountains, where rainfall and snowmelt seeped into the ground. Skilled surveyors, using nothing but gravity and ancient know-how, would locate this water table and then chart a gentle, sloping tunnel back toward the settlement or oasis, sometimes for dozens of miles. Vertical shafts were dug down to the tunnel's path every 100 feet or so for ventilation and for removing the excavated earth. The result was a hidden artery, a gravity-fed canal that flowed silently underground, protected from the evaporating sun and blowing sand. It delivered a steady, cool trickle of water directly to orchards, communal cisterns, and Caravanserai basins. The Qanat was the ultimate act of patience and communal investment, a project that might take a lifetime to build but would sustain a community for centuries. For a caravan, a Qanat-fed oasis was the pinnacle of security, a water source that was far less likely to vanish in a drought. This precarious dependency made water a weapon and a prize. The rules of rationing were unforgiving. A human might receive just 1 or 2 liters per day for all needs, drinking, cooking, and a scant few drops for ritual cleansing. Camels were watered according to a strict schedule tied to the distance to the next source. The catastrophic failure point was not a bandit attack, but a well gone wrong. A single rotting animal carcass falling into a well could poison it for months, spelling doom for any caravan that arrived expecting salvation. A natural spring silting up or a Qanat collapsing in an earthquake could erase a vital node from the map, forcing a permanent and dangerous rerouting of the entire trade artery. This vulnerability granted immense power to those who controlled the water. A local tribe holding a critical oasis could demand exorbitant Kufara payments, not just for safe passage, but for the water itself. Wars were fought over these liquid way stations, and treaties between empires often specifically guaranteed access to them. The caravan's size was not determined by how many camels a merchant could buy, but by how much water the next oasis could provide. Its speed was a constant compromise between covering distance and conserving the vital stores sloshing in the skins on their backs. In the end, the glittering cities of Baghdad and Cairo were not just sustained by caravans, they were sustained by a fragile, invisible chain of holes in the ground, each one a miracle of discovery or engineering, holding back the desert's final, thirsty verdict. The caravan's schedule was written in the sky and felt in the wind. Movement across the deserts was not a matter of whimsical departure, but a strict adherence to a celestial and ecological calendar that governed all life. To ignore these rhythms was to court annihilation, for the desert's tolerance was seasonal, and its pathways were only open during specific windows of the year. This synchronization of human ambition with natural law created a predictable, pulsating heartbeat of trade that empires learned to protect and exploit. Consider the most sacred of journeys, the pilgrimage to Mecca. The Hajj occurs during a fixed month in the Islamic lunar calendar. This religious imperative created the world's most reliable annual trade event. For centuries before the appointed time, caravans would begin coalescing from Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad. These were not just groups of pilgrims, but massive commercial enterprises. Merchants knew that converging on Mecca with hundreds of thousands of faithful presented a once-a-year marketplace of unparalleled scale. The Syrian caravan departing from Damascus was an imperial spectacle sponsored and protected by the Ottoman Sultan himself. It moved with a royal procession, carrying not only pilgrims but also the annual covering for the Kaaba, a symbol of political and religious authority arriving across the desert. The timing was absolute, dictated by faith, and the entire economic ecosystem of the Hijaz region came to depend on this predictable, protected influx of people and wealth. Far to the west, a different seasonal trigger dictated life or death. The colossal Trans-Saharan caravans, sometimes comprising thousands of camels, could only launch after the summer rains. This was a matter of basic biology. While camels could survive on little, they still needed to graze. The brief rainy season, from July to September, would coax a fragile carpet of grasses and shrubs from the sands, creating a temporary pasture known as the ape. Caravans departing from trading hubs like Sijil Massa in Morocco would time their journeys to coincide with this greening. They would move south, following the sprouting vegetation, allowing their animals to feed and regain strength for the deeper, more barren stretches ahead. This meant trade was not continuous but pulsed in great annual waves. The southbound salt caravans and the northbound gold caravans were events that whole societies prepared for, their departures and anticipated returns structuring the year, the tax collection, and the market cycles of cities on both sides of the desert. On the Silk Road, the rhythm was dictated by altitude and temperature. The mountain passes of the Pamirs or the Tian Shan were death traps under winter snow. Spring thaw and autumn clarity provided the only safe passage. Caravans would gather in the oasis cities of Samarkand or Kashgar, waiting for scouts to confirm the high paths were clear. To leave too early meant facing avalanches and frozen tracks. To leave too late meant confronting the blizzards that closed the passes until the next year, stranding goods and merchants for an entire season. Similarly, the crossing of the Taklamakan Desert, whose name ominously translates to place of no return, was attempted primarily in the cooler autumn and winter months to avoid the furnace-like summer heat that could evaporate a water skin in a day and bake the very sand. This created a biannual pulse of east-west exchange, a spring and autumn flood of goods that made the central Caravanserai's boom towns twice a year. This profound entanglement with nature demanded powerful guardians. The lucrative, predictable rhythms of trade were far too valuable to be left to chance or banditry. Great political entities arose not just to tax this flow, but to actively cultivate and protect its schedule. The Mali Empire maintained a standing corps of guides and soldiers to secure the salt gold routes. The Ottoman Empire invested in fortifying wells and garrisoning key caravanserais along the Hajj roads. The Mongol Empire, after its initial conquests, famously established the Pax Mongolica, an enforced peace across the Silk Road that allowed the seasonal caravans to move with unprecedented security, knowing that the same legal code and administrative efficiency stretched from the Pacific to the Black Sea. These states understood that their wealth and legitimacy were tied to the safe, timely passage of the caravans. They were not just political powers, they were logistical partners, ensuring the calendar of the desert was respected and that the lifeblood of commerce kept pulsing on time year after year. This grand, synchronized system seemed eternal, a perfect marriage of human need and environmental possibility. But its greatest threat was not a change in the seasons, but a slow, silent shift in the very climate it depended upon. The caravan's seasonal pulse required a powerful, steady hand to keep its rhythm. In the vast, stateless deserts, the difference between a profitable journey and a catastrophic loss was not just good planning, but the explicit protection of political power. The great rulers of the age understood this with crystal clarity. They did not view the caravans as mere taxable nuisances passing through their realms. They saw them as the very arteries of their empire, and they became their most powerful patrons and protectors. This was a profound, symbiotic partnership, a deal struck between the palace and the marketplace that glued the entire fragile system together across thousands of miles of wilderness. Consider the legendary Mansa Musa, ruler of the Mali Empire in the 14th century. His famous pilgrimage to Mecca is often remembered for the staggering display of gold that disrupted economies along his route. But that journey was also a masterclass in state-sponsored logistics and security. He traveled with a retinue of tens of thousands, including soldiers, officials, and merchants. This was not just a religious procession, it was a mobile declaration of power. By moving his own court across the Sahara, he was personally guaranteeing the safety of the route, showcasing Mali's control over the desert corridors that brought salt north and gold south. His wealth, famously derived from Mali's gold fields, was meaningless unless that gold could reach Mediterranean markets, so his administration invested in the trade's infrastructure, securing treaties with the nomadic Tuareg who controlled the wells and likely financing the caravans themselves. His legendary wealth was not just mined, it was escorted. Across the Islamic world, this model was institutionalized. The Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad, and later the Ottoman sultans, did not simply collect customs duties at the city gates and call it a day. They actively built the hardware of trade. They commissioned and funded the construction of caravanserais along major routes, spacing them a day's journey apart. These were not private enterprises but public works, often inscribed with the name of the ruler who ordered them built. A weary traveler resting within those fortified walls was resting under the direct protection of the caliph's authority. The state also provided the software of security. They stationed small garrisons at critical oases and mountain passes, creating a thin but crucial line of official presence in the lawless spaces between cities. They appointed official road wardens whose job was to patrol specific stretches and suppress banditry. Perhaps most importantly, they used their diplomatic weight to negotiate and enforce treaties with the nomadic tribes whose territories the caravans crossed. These agreements formalized the Kufara, the safe passage payment, turning a potential shakedown into a regulated toll, a stable cost of doing business that benefited both the tribe and the state that wanted trade to flow. In return for this umbrella of protection, merchants offered the state two invaluable things. The first was obvious: revenue. Taxes on goods were a primary source of funding for armies, palaces, and public works. But the second was legitimacy. A bustling, well-supplied capital city was a visible testament to a ruler's power and divine favor. The ability to command ice from the mountains or silk from China for the royal court was a potent symbol of reach and sophistication. Furthermore, rulers often granted favored merchants monopoly rights on certain luxury goods or routes. This created a class of super-wealthy, loyal business elites whose fortunes were inextricably linked to the stability of the regime. They became financiers for the state, lenders in times of war, and administrators of complex commercial enterprises. This partnership was the true engine. The desert was not a vacuum, it was a network of overlapping interests. The caravan master navigating the dunes was relying on a chain of agreements brokered in marble palaces hundreds of miles away. The Sultan's power, projected from his throne room, extended along those sandy tracks in the form of a guarded well, a repaired bridge, or a feared road warden. One provided stability and force, the other provided wealth and connectivity. Without this political-economic glue, the caravan system would have remained a risky, small-scale endeavor. With it, it became the circulatory system of continents, capable of sustaining cities of 500,000 in the heart of a wasteland. Yet, this magnificent, human-built system faced a threat that no sultan's army could defeat: a slow, silent change in the very climate that had dictated its rhythms for centuries. The great caravan arteries did not collapse, they were slowly bypassed. For centuries, the desert had been the only viable highway between continents. But that monopoly was about to be broken by a fundamental shift in the economics of moving things. The primary challenger was the sea, starting around the 12th century and accelerating dramatically in the 15th. Maritime technology underwent a quiet revolution. Shipbuilders in the Indian Ocean and later in Europe perfected larger, sturdier vessels with deeper hulls and more sophisticated rigging. The Arab how and later the Portuguese carack could carry cargo on a scale the camel train could never match. Think of the mathematics. A single large sailing ship might carry the equivalent of 1,000 camel loads. It moved that cargo not at the walking pace of 3 miles per hour, but at the mercy of the wind, which could cover 100 miles in a day. Most crucially, it did so with a fraction of the human overhead. A ship required 1 crewman for every ton or more of cargo. A caravan required a driver for every few animals, plus guards, cooks, and specialists. The cost differential for bulk goods, especially the life-sustaining grain and timber that cities desperately needed, became overwhelming. Why pay to walk wheat across 1,000 miles of desert when you could sail it across the Indian Ocean directly to a port city? Maritime routes began to siphon off the most profitable and essential streams of commerce, leaving the overland networks with the luxury goods that could still bear the high cost of desert transport, a shrinking niche in a globalizing economy. This economic pressure was compounded by political fracture. The 13th century Mongol invasions were a double-edged sword. Initially, they caused catastrophic disruption, as ancient cities were overwhelmed and trade routes severed by war. But in their aftermath, the Mongols established the Pax Mongolica, that unprecedented peace across Eurasia that allowed the Silk Road to flourish as never before. However, this unity was fragile. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the vast Mongol Empire had splintered into rival Khanates that often warred with each other. The safe corridor from China to the Black Sea fragmented into a patchwork of hostile borders and competing toll collectors. Banditry, once suppressed by Mongol efficiency, resurged as central authority waned. The cost and risk of sending a caravan from, say, Beijing to Tabriz became prohibitive. Merchants now faced not one imperial guarantee, but a dozen local warlords, each demanding payment and offering uncertain protection. The political fragmentation of the overland world stood in stark contrast to the growing control powerful states like Portugal, and later the Netherlands and Britain, exerted over sea lanes. They could project naval power to protect their merchant fleets in a way that no land empire could reliably secure every mountain pass and desert track. Beneath these human decisions, the very land itself was changing. The caravan system was a delicate symbiosis with a specific environment, and that environment was not static. Paleoclimatologists studying ancient lake beds and soil samples have found evidence of subtle but significant aridification in key regions during the late medieval period. Oases that had been reliable for centuries began to shrink. Springs that once fed vital Qanat systems may have slowed or dried up. This was not a sudden, dramatic drought, but a creeping, generational shift. A well that once supported a large caravanserai might, over 100 years, become unable to water more than a few families. Routes had to be painstakingly rerouted to find new sources, adding days or weeks to journeys and increasing costs. In some areas, advancing sand dunes literally buried the old tracks, obscuring the subtle landmarks guides had relied upon for generations. This environmental stress made the already difficult overland journey even more precarious and expensive, further pushing merchants toward the relative predictability of the sea. The result was a slow, relentless rerouting of the world's circulatory system. Desert cities that had been central hubs found themselves on economic sidelines. Places like Palmyra or Sijilmassa, once throbbing with the commerce of continents, dwindled as the new streams of wealth flowed to coastal ports like Aden, Calicut, and later, Lisbon and Amsterdam. The caravans did not vanish overnight. They persisted for centuries on regional routes, carrying pilgrims to Mecca and facilitating local trade. But their role as the indispensable lifelines of mega-cities faded. They could no longer compete with the ships hauled for feeding millions, and without that foundational bulk trade, their economic and cultural prominence inevitably dimmed. This was not a failure of the system, but a testament to its success. The caravans had woven the world together so effectively that they ultimately inspired the technologies and created the demand for a faster, cheaper alternative. In doing so, they wrote their own final chapter, not with a dramatic ending, but by quietly making themselves obsolete. The desert still holds their secrets. Today, the legacy of the caravan world is not found in history books, but etched into the very landscape, waiting for those who know how to look. This is an archaeological detective hunt, a search for the physical memory of a system that moved empires. The most haunting witnesses are the Caravanserais themselves. In the desolate expanses of Iran's dashed Ekavir, the salt desert, you can stand before the crumbling walls of a way station like Robat Sharaf. Its grand arched entrance, now a gaping maw, once welcomed thousands. Inside, the central courtyard is silent, filled only with wind and the shadows of what was. You can trace the outline of the stables where camels groaned, the raised platform where the caravan master held court, and the small, dark chambers above where exhausted travelers slept. These ruins are not just old buildings, they are fossilized hospitality, their skeletal remains mapping the precise distance a laden camel could walk in a single day. Beyond these fortresses of rest, the travelers left more personal marks. On canyon walls and isolated rock faces along ancient routes like the Incense Road in Jordan's Wadi Rum, you find petroglyphs. These are not official monuments but spontaneous graffiti scratched by bored or contemplative hands. A simple carving of a camel, its distinctive single hump clear even after 1,000 years. A line of script in Nabatean or early Arabic, perhaps a name, a prayer for safe passage, or a note that someone was here. One famous example simply reads, "In the name of God." These are intimate whispers across time, the human impulse to say I existed, I passed this way, when the surrounding emptiness offered no other reply. Then there are the fragments. Walk the old trails in the Negev desert or the fringes of the Taklamakan, and you might still find a scatter of pottery sherds worn smooth by sand and time. These are the broken remains of water jars, cooking pots, and storage vessels that fell from a pack saddle or were discarded at a campsite. A trained eye can date them, tracing the style of glaze or the clay's composition back to a specific century and even a distant workshop. More thrilling are the occasional coins, bronze fills or silver dirhams, dropped from a merchant's purse. Each coin is a data point, marking not just wealth, but a moment of economic connection, a tiny piece of a financial network that stretched from Spain to Siberia. The most powerful tools in this hunt are now digital. Modern archaeologists use satellite imagery and LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, to see what the naked eye cannot. From space, multispectral cameras can detect subtle differences in vegetation or soil moisture, revealing the ghostly lines of paths long buried under sand dunes. LiDAR, which uses laser pulses from an aircraft, can strip away vegetation to map the ground surface with incredible precision. In the dense jungles of Central America, it has revealed lost cities. In the deserts, it is revealing lost highways. It can show the faint, parallel ruts of countless camel trains converging on a vanished oasis, or the engineered foundation of a caravanserai that is now just a barely perceptible mound. This technology allows us to map the entire circulatory system of the desert, not just its surviving heartbeats. These silent stones, faded carvings, and digital ghosts are more than relics. They are the tangible proof of the intangible. They give physical form to the courage of the guide reading the stars, the weariness of the driver walking his 10,000th mile, and the bustling exchange of the merchant in the courtyard. Each pottery sherd was once held by a real hand. Each coin financed a real dream. Together, they form a mosaic of movement, a testament to the countless ordinary journeys that collectively achieved the extraordinary. They remind us that history is not just about kings and battles, but about the patterns of everyday life that sustain the world. And if these stones could talk, They would tell us that the caravan's greatest legacy was not the goods it moved, but the connections it forged between people, places, and ideas, echoes of which still resonate in our interconnected world today. The words we use today are living artifacts of the caravan age. Language itself was a cargo on those sandy tracks, a silent exchange that reshaped how people from the Mediterranean to the China Sea spoke, traded, and even thought. Each time we step into a bustling bazaar, that word itself is a souvenir from the Persian bazaar, meaning market, carried west by merchants and travelers who described those vibrant, crowded commercial hubs. The very concept of a caravan comes from the Persian Caravan, that traveling fortress of merchants and camels, a term that entered languages from Turkish to English because the thing it described was so essential, so universal, to the operation of the medieval world. This was not a casual borrowing of terms, it was a linguistic necessity. When new goods, new financial instruments, and new social structures arrived, people needed new words to describe them. The caravan trade acted as a vast, slow-motion blender for vocabulary, mixing and matching terms across continents, and leaving behind a trail of etymological breadcrumbs we still follow. Consider the paperwork of global trade. The modern word check, as in a bank check, has a journey worthy of a Silk Road epic. It originates from the Persian sak, meaning a written order or a commercial note. This concept traveled into Arabic as sak, and then into medieval Latin as saccus, eventually entering European banking as a check, a written order to a bank to pay money from one account to another. That slip of paper in your wallet is a direct descendant of the financial trust that powered caravans, a system of credit that had to be standardized across cultures to function. Similarly, a tariff, the list of duties you pay on imports, comes from the Arabic tarif, meaning notification or inventory. It was the official notice posted at a customs house, detailing what the ruler required for goods to enter his city. Every time the term is used, it echoes the moment a caravan master presented his ledger to a clerk at the gates of Cairo or Baghdad. Even the places where goods ended up bear the linguistic imprint of the trade. The word magazine, meaning a storage place for ammunition or a periodical publication, comes from the Arabic makhazin, the plural for storehouse or treasury. In the context of the caravan, a makhazin was a state warehouse where grain, weapons, or valuable goods were kept secure. The term traveled into Italian as magazzino and into French as magazine, retaining its meaning as a storehouse for goods. The later evolution to mean a publication, a storehouse of articles and ideas, beautifully illustrates how a concrete, logistical term can evolve into an abstract cultural one. These words are not just labels, they are fossilized pieces of social and economic history. They prove that the influence of these trade networks went far deeper than material exchange. It rewired the very frameworks of communication. You did not just learn a new word for a spice, you absorbed a new concept for a contract, a market, or a tax. This linguistic diffusion was the software update for a connecting world, allowing a merchant from Genoa to negotiate with a banker in Alexandria using a shared, hybrid vocabulary of commerce that transcended their native tongues. This blending of words was just one layer of a profound cultural synthesis, where stories, artistic styles, and entire worldviews were also unpacked from camel bags and shared around Caravanserai fires, slowly weaving a shared identity across the world's most formidable divides. The bundles carried more than goods, they carried the very blueprints of culture. When a caravan halted at a caravanserai, the unloading process was not merely physical. As camels knelt and bales were untied, invisible cargo was also unpacked: styles of art, notes of music, flavors of food, and whispers of faith. These elements did not remain in separate compartments. They mingled in the courtyard, creating a fusion that would redefine civilizations. This was the caravan's most profound and lasting gift, a slow, deliberate blending of human expression across continents. The evidence is in the art that survived. Look closely at a Persian miniature painting from the 14th or 15th century. You see the intricate patterns, the lush gardens, and the poetic scenes typical of Persian tradition. But then you notice something else, the treatment of clouds rendered as delicate, swirling wisps, or the distant, blue-hazed mountains fading into the background. These are not Persian techniques, they are Chinese. They arrived along the Silk Road, carried in the sketchbooks and memories of artists who traveled with merchants, or in the actual painted scrolls traded as luxury items. Persian masters saw these new ways of depicting landscape and space and absorbed them not to copy, but to enrich their own visual language. The result was something entirely new, a hybrid art that spoke to a connected world. This cross-pollination shaped the very skyline of cities. The pointed arch, so iconic in Gothic cathedrals across Europe, did not spring from the mind of a French architect in isolation. Its engineering principles and aesthetic were refined in the Islamic world, seen in structures like the Great Mosque of Cordoba. Through trade and cultural contact, often facilitated by merchant caravans and the movement of craftsmen, these architectural ideas traveled north. They were adapted, modified, and merged with local traditions to create the soaring vaults of places like Notre Dame. A structural solution born in one desert civilization helped another to build its temples to the heavens. Even the most personal of beliefs were carried on the trade winds. Islam spread into the islands of Southeast Asia not primarily by conquest, but through the quiet, persistent presence of Muslim merchants from Gujarat and Arabia. These traders arrived in ports like Malacca, establishing communities, marrying locally, and conducting business with integrity. Their faith was observed, respected, and gradually adopted, blending with existing animist and Hindu-Buddhist traditions to create a distinct Southeast Asian Islamic culture. Similarly, Buddhism traveled from its Indian homeland along the Silk Road into Central Asia and China, its sutras translated in oasis towns, its iconography picking up Greco-Roman influences from earlier contacts in places like Gandhara. The serene Buddha statues of Dunhuang Caves stand as monuments to this peaceful, caravan-born transmission of ideas. But perhaps the most delicious legacy is found on our plates. The humble noodle presents a tasty mystery. While Italy proudly claims pasta, some food historians trace a possible lineage back to China, where noodles have been documented for thousands of years. The theory suggests the concept, if not the exact recipe, may have traveled west with Mongol expansions and the merchants that followed. Whether this is culinary fact or flavorful legend, it symbolizes the profound exchange. More certain is the spice revolution. Before the caravan networks matured, European cuisine was largely bland, relying on local herbs. Then, through complex overland routes, spices like black pepper from India, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, and cloves from the distant Maluku Islands in Indonesia began to arrive. They were worth more than their weight in gold because they transformed food, medicine, and status. A medieval European feast seasoned with pepper and ginger was a direct sensory experience of a world far wider than anyone in the room could imagine. Each bite was a connection to a Malay rainforest, an Indian plantation, and the Arab trader who brokered the deal. The caravan was thus the original melting pot, but one that moved at 3 miles per hour. It did not force assimilation, it facilitated introduction. In the shared space of a market or the communal shelter of a caravanserai, differences were not just tolerated, they were the raw materials for something new. A Persian artist could be inspired by Chinese landscapes, an Italian cook could experiment with Asian spices, and a Javanese prince could adopt a Middle Eastern faith, all because a line of camels created a bridge. This slow, centuries-long dialogue of goods and ideas created the first truly interconnected world, a patchwork of hybrid cultures that is the direct and vibrant precursor to our own globalized age. Their journey asks us a subtle question: what seemingly ordinary exchanges in our own time are quietly weaving the culture of tomorrow? The silent desert was never truly quiet, for it was filled with stories. Long after the camels passed and the caravanserais fell silent, the most enduring cargo of all continued its journey, carried on the breath of poets and the strings of lutes. This was the mythology of the caravan, a rich tapestry of folklore and song that transformed hard logistics into the very metaphors for human existence. In this oral and written record, the caravan became more than a line of animals. It became a powerful symbol for life itself, a journey through peril and wonder toward an uncertain destination. The most famous collection is the Arabian Nights, where the frame story itself is a caravan of tales. Scheherazade spins her stories to save her life, but within them, merchants are the heroes. They are the travelers who encounter jennies in sealed jars, discover magic carpets in forgotten caves, and navigate cities of brass and valleys of diamonds. These fantastical adventures are grounded in a very real world, the world of risk and reward, where a merchant's cunning and faith are tested as severely as any knight's courage. The caravan in these stories is the bridge between the ordinary and the miraculous, the means by which a humble trader from Cairo can stumble upon a destiny that changes kingdoms. This narrative tradition did not just entertain, it codified the values of the caravan age: patience, trust in fate, and the transformative power of a journey. Poets elevated this symbol to the spiritual realm. The great Persian mystic Rumi and the lyric master Hafez did not write logistics manuals, they wrote the soul's itinerary. In their works, the caravan is a constant, beautiful metaphor. Life is a caravan journey, moving from the dawn of birth toward the sunset of our time here. The soul is a weary traveler seeking the caravanserai of divine love, a resting place after the long exile. The beloved, whether human or divine, is the distant destination that makes the hardship of the desert worthwhile. Rumi might write, "I am a camel driver on the path of love, and my load is the fire of passion." The physical realities of the road, thirst, bandits, the guiding stars, all become mirrors for spiritual longing, discipline, and hope. This poetic adoption is a profound testament. It shows that the caravan was so central to the medieval mind that it became the most natural way to explain the ineffable journey of the human spirit. The rhythm of the camel's gait became the rhythm of meditation, the vast emptiness a mirror for the soul's solitude before God. For the people who lived in the desert, the stories were not metaphor, they were memory etched in song. The Tuareg of the Sahara, the Bedouin of Arabia, they did not build their history from stone. They wove it from music and verse. Around fires under a blanket of stars, elders would sing ancient ballads, their voices accompanied by the deep, resonant strum of a tin drum or the plaintive notes of a rababa, a simple stringed instrument. These were not love songs, they were epic chronicles. A ballad might memorialize a specific, catastrophic event, like the loss of a great caravan in a legendary sandstorm known as the Mother of All Winds. The song would name the caravan master, list the precious goods swallowed by the dunes, and mourn the specific families who lost fathers and sons. It served as a historical record, a warning, and a communal mourning. Other songs functioned as auditory maps and social guides. They would poetically describe a famous route, listing the wells in order, noting the mountain that looks like a sleeping lion, or the canyon where the afternoon wind always sings. A young man learning the song was learning the way, his education set to a melody he would never forget. These ballads also celebrated the heroes of the road, not kings, but the guides who could smell water over the horizon, or the guards who stood alone against a raiding party to let the main train escape. In a culture with no written history, these songs were the living archive, the emotional and cultural hard drive of the caravan era. They kept its spirit, its dangers, and its triumphs vibrantly alive for generations who might never see a 1,000-camel train. This legacy of story and song challenges a modern assumption that history is only what is written down or dug up. The true impact of the caravan is measured not just in pottery sherds and coin hoards, but in the metaphors we still use and the universal stories we still tell. When we speak of life as a journey, of seeking our path, or of spiritual longing, we are speaking the language of the Silk Road, refined by poets who saw in the plodding camel train a mirror for every human heart. The caravans built an infrastructure of the imagination. They provided a shared narrative framework, a set of characters, the merchant, the guide, the bandit, and a landscape of profound challenge that every culture could recognize. This shared mythology subtly wove disparate peoples into a common story. A merchant in Venice reading a version of an Arabian Nights tale, a Sufi in Kashmir meditating on a line of Rumi, and a Tuareg elder singing a desert ballad were all, in different ways, participating in the same cultural universe born from the dust of the trade routes. The stories ensured that even after the economics shifted and the last great caravan passed, the essence of that world, its perils, its wonders, and its hard-won wisdom would never be forgotten. It simply changed vehicles, moving from the backs of camels to the pages of books and the chords of songs, traveling forward in time to remind us that our most enduring monuments are often made not of stone, but of words and melody. The ancient caravan master would recognize our world in an instant. The problems he faced, the solutions he crafted, they have not vanished, they have simply upgraded their technology. The sprawling, windowless caravanserai that offered safety and resupply in the desert is today's massive container port, a fortified hub where goods are transferred, stored, and redirected along global routes. The caravan master, the Karwan Bashi balancing pace, security, and morale, is the modern supply chain manager staring at a digital dashboard, tracking a vessel's position in real time while calculating port delays and fuel costs. Their core mission is identical: move precious cargo from point A to point B through a landscape filled with unpredictable obstacles, and do it profitably. The financial engine that powered it all, the Commander Partnership, is the direct ancestor of modern venture capital. It was a model built on shared risk and reward, where a stationary investor provided the funds and a traveling partner provided the sweat and expertise. Today, a Silicon Valley venture capitalist funds a startup's journey into the uncertain market, betting on the team's skill to navigate the terrain. The structure of the gamble, the distribution of potential windfalls and losses, is eerily familiar. Even the threats have transformed. The bandits waiting in a mountain pass demanding a toll for safe passage have their counterparts in digital shadows. Ransomware attacks that lock a company's logistics data, holding it hostage until a payment is made in cryptocurrency, are the Kufara negotiations of the cyber age. Modern piracy in the waters off Somalia or the Strait of Malacca is not a relic. It is the same economic calculation of risk versus reward, just conducted from speedboats instead of horseback. The fundamental challenges are timeless: managing risk across vast distances, ensuring security for valuable assets, navigating politically complex routes, and hitting a delivery window dictated by seasons, markets, or religious calendars. A medieval caravan timed its departure with the monsoon rains to find pasture, just as a modern supertanker schedules its passage through the Suez Canal to avoid peak fees and congestion. The caravan driver's mental map of stars and dune shapes is today's algorithm optimizing a delivery route for a fleet of trucks, calculating traffic, weather, and rest stops for drivers. This is not just a quaint historical comparison, it is a revelation. It reframes the story of the desert caravans from a dusty artifact into a vibrant, living case study in human ingenuity. It shows us that our complex, just-in-time world did not emerge from a vacuum. It is the latest iteration of a very old, very human struggle to connect, to trade, and to sustain communities against the odds. The tools have changed from camels to container ships, from handwritten ledgers to blockchain, but the underlying architecture of trust, coordination, and problem-solving is built on a foundation laid 1,000 years ago on the Silk Road. This perspective holds a crucial lesson for our future. As we face new disruptions, whether climate-related shifts that close ports or political fractures that sever digital trade routes, we are not encountering unprecedented chaos. We are facing a new version of an ancient test. The solutions may lie not only in inventing new technologies, but in remembering old wisdom, the resilience of decentralized networks, the value of trusted personal relationships in a digital age, and the understanding that every supply chain, no matter how advanced, is ultimately a fragile thread woven across a perilous landscape. The Caravan's legacy teaches us that sustainability is not about building an unbreakable system, but about cultivating the adaptive intelligence to repair the threads when they inevitably fray. Their story is a masterclass in resilience written across continents. The desert traders operated under a simple, brutal rule: the system must survive, even if a single caravan does not. This mindset forged strategies that feel startlingly relevant today, a blueprint for enduring in an unpredictable world. The first principle was redundancy. A wise caravan master never relied on a single route or a sole water source. If the well at Al Jawf was poisoned or controlled by a hostile tribe, he knew the location of 3 other, less-known springs a day's journey to the east. The entire network was a web of alternatives. When political conflict closed the northern Silk Road through Samarkand, trade simply pulsed harder along the southern routes through the Hindu Kush. This redundancy was not wasteful, it was the essential backup system. In our modern context, a company relying on a single supplier for a critical component, or a city dependent on one fragile power grid, is operating like a caravan with only one known well. The ancient lesson is clear: build optionality into your core design. The second principle was profound adaptability. Caravans did not fight the desert, they learned its rhythms and bent with them. A sandstorm meant hunkering down, not pressing forward. A lost guide meant halting to consult the stars, not wandering blindly. When the Mongol invasions shattered the old political order, merchants did not give up. They adapted to the new reality of the Pax Mongolica, learning new customs and new official languages to keep goods moving. Their system was what we might now call antifragile. It often grew stronger from shocks. A bandit raid on a known pass might force the discovery of a safer, if longer, mountain trail that later became the preferred route. A drought that dried up a traditional oasis spurred the engineering of a new Qanat, permanently improving the infrastructure. They viewed disruption not as a full stop, but as a forced opportunity to innovate. This leads to the third pillar, the irreplaceable value of deep local knowledge and trusted partnerships. The financier in his Baghdad office was powerful, but he was utterly dependent on the guide who could read the dunes and the tribal chief whose goodwill ensured safe passage. This was not a transaction, it was a relationship built over decades, sometimes generations. A merchant's word was his bond, because in a world without instant communication, trust was the only currency that worked everywhere. Today, in an age of digital contracts and global outsourcing, we can underestimate this human element. The Caravan reminds us that the most efficient spreadsheet cannot replace the partner on the ground who understands the local realities, the subtle shifts in the political wind, or the unspoken rules of the marketplace. Finally, there was the philosophy of the journey itself, the power of incremental progress. No one crossed the desert in a single bound. The goal was never the distant city, it was always the next oasis. The camel driver's mantra was not 500 miles to go, but 15 miles today, then rest, then 15 more tomorrow. This relentless, plodding focus on the immediate, achievable milestone is what made the impossible journey routine. It is a powerful antidote to being overwhelmed by a colossal challenge, whether building a business, writing a book, or navigating a personal hardship. You do not conquer the desert, you simply walk it one oasis at a time. In an era defined by climate volatility and fragile global supply chains, these are not dusty historical footnotes. They are urgent insights, building redundant systems, cultivating adaptive flexibility, investing in deep local relationships, and committing to steady, incremental progress. These are the tools for constructing systems that do not just survive disruption, but are tempered by it. The desert traders understood that resilience is not a wall, it is a web, and its greatest strength lies in its countless interconnected, alternative paths forward. The city itself was the caravan's final, permanent cargo. Look at Samarkand, its turquoise domes glowing like captive pieces of the sky against the dusty plains. That breathtaking tilework, those soaring arches, were not paid for by local taxes on wheat farmers. They were financed by the river of silver that flowed from customs houses, a direct tithe on every bale of Chinese silk, every ingot of Siberian gold that passed through its gates. The great Registan Square, framed by 3 madrasas adorned with intricate geometric patterns, was a billboard paid for by transcontinental trade, a statement that this city was a nexus of the world's wealth. The same was true in Damascus, where the glittering mosaics of the Umayyad Mosque whispered of Byzantine gold and the patronage of merchants who grew fat on the incense and spice routes. These stone monuments are frozen capital, the caravan's profits transformed into permanent, awe-inspiring beauty. But the caravan's legacy was not just in stone, it was in the very fabric of society. Walk the streets of these cities at their height, and you would hear a dozen languages, see faces from every corner of Asia and Africa. This was not an accident. The constant arrival and departure of caravans made these hubs profoundly cosmopolitan. A scholar from Persia, a soldier from the steppes, a Jewish merchant from Andalusia, and a Hindu accountant from Gujarat could all find themselves sharing a meal in a Damascus courtyard. This diversity was the direct result of the trade routes, a human tapestry woven from countless threads of journey and ambition. The city's physical layout was engineered for this constant motion. You would not find a single, chaotic market. Instead, urban planning reflected the caravan's needs. Separate, fortified compounds called funduks were built for foreign merchant communities. These were more than inns, they were secure enclaves where traders from a specific region, say Genoa or Gujarat, could store their goods, worship in their own style, and be governed by their own representative under the ruler's protection. This system managed the flow of strangers, giving them a home base and integrating them into the city's economy without forcing assimilation. And radiating from these funduks were the specialized bazaars, the commercial veins of the city. There was the street of the silk sellers, the alley of the perfumers, the square of the coppersmiths. This organization was for efficiency. A caravan master with a load of spices knew exactly where to go, and a local buyer knew where to find the best leather or the newest shipment of Indian indigo. The Grand Bazaar was the beating heart, but its rhythm was set by the distant plod of camel feet. Even the city's vulnerabilities were shaped by the caravan. A prolonged drought in the mountains that disrupted the routes, or a war that closed a critical pass, would cause immediate panic in the markets and empty the Sultan's coffers. The health of the city was directly tied to the health of the pathways that fed it. So when you stand before the ruins of a caravanserai in the desert, you are looking at a seed. And when you stand in the grandeur of a place like Samarkand's Registan, you are looking at the magnificent flowering tree that grew from it. The city was the ultimate caravanserai, one that people never left, a permanent testament to the power of connection. It asks us to look at our own world capitals, these hubs of finance and culture, and wonder what invisible caravans sustain them today. Every footprint in the sand carries a hidden weight. For all its ingenuity, the caravan system was not a ghost moving through the wilderness. It was a massive, centuries-long ecological event. The relentless rhythm of thousands of hooves and the needs of countless travelers quietly, permanently reshaped the very deserts they crossed. This was the system's silent disruption, an environmental footprint etched into the landscape itself. The most immediate impact was at the oases, those fragile islands of green. A major caravanserai might host several large caravans each week during the peak season. Each train brought hundreds, sometimes thousands, of camels, horses, and donkeys. These animals all needed to graze. The result was a radiating circle of overgrazed land around every permanent water source. The delicate, native grasses and shrubs that held the desert soil in place were cropped to the root and could not recover before the next herd arrived. Over decades, this turned the lush margins of oases into dusty, trampled rings, expanding the desert's own borders inch by inch. The very lifelines of the network were being worn down by its own constant thirst. Beyond grazing, the demand for resources was relentless. Caravanserais and the homes in oasis towns required vast amounts of timber for beams, doors, and repair. In regions where trees were already scarce, this led to the local depletion of specific species, like the hardy acacia or tamarisk, which were prized for their strong, termite-resistant wood. Fuel was another constant need. While dried camel dung was used when possible, the cooking fires for hundreds of people and the forges of traveling blacksmiths consumed wood. Scouts would range farther and farther from the routes to gather anything that would burn, slowly stripping the landscape of its already minimal woody vegetation. The caravan also created a direct market for wildlife. The magnificent Arabian ostrich, once common across the peninsula, was hunted intensively for its valuable feathers, which adorned helmets and ceremonial fans, and for its meat and eggs. While not hunted to extinction by the caravans alone, the trade provided a powerful economic incentive that accelerated their decline in many regions. The system acted as a funnel, concentrating demand on specific, vulnerable points in the ecology. Yet, this same system also fostered an inadvertent form of stewardship. Survival demanded it. The maintenance of wells and the miraculous Qanat systems was not an act of charity toward nature. It was a profound act of self-interest. Communities and caravan guilds invested enormous labor in cleaning wells, repairing Qanat tunnels, and protecting these water sources from silt or collapse. This was a direct investment in their own future. A well-maintained Qanat could flow for centuries, supporting not just human settlement but creating a stable micro-habitat for date palms, fruit trees, and the birds and insects that thrived in those shaded, watered corridors. In a very real sense, the caravan economy created a powerful incentive to understand and manage the water table, a form of ancient hydro-engineering that sustained life for generations. The legacy is one of complex balance. The caravan network did not tread lightly. It left a permanent scar of trails, depleted woodlands, and altered ecosystems around its hubs. But it also bound human prosperity directly to the health of a few critical resources, forcing a kind of long-term responsibility that pure extraction does not encourage. It shows us that no human system, no matter how sustainable relative to its time, passes through the world without leaving a mark. The question is not whether we leave a footprint, but whether, like those ancient well tenders, we are compelled by our own survival to care for the ground we stand on. The story of the forgotten overland caravans is a testament to humanity's relentless drive to connect, innovate, and thrive against the odds. These networks of endurance built the world's first globalized economy, nourishing dazzling cities of learning and culture in places where life seemed impossible. They remind us that our civilizations have always been interconnected, built on flows of goods, ideas, and people. As we face our own modern deserts of uncertainty, the caravan's lessons in resilience, adaptation, and shared enterprise are more relevant than ever. If you found this journey through the sands of time enlightening, delve deeper by subscribing for more stories of hidden history, and share in the comments which desert city or trade good fascinates you most.